Coney, time for question time. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks very much, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, since being elected in 2022, the Albanese Labor government has announced more than $50 billion in off-budget spending, hidden away to contribute, though, to a $49.3 billion deterioration to the budget bottom line, the worst in history that's now going to occur outside of a war or pandemic. The government's now promising to add billions more to off-budget spending. How can the government justify all of this off-budget spending while refusing also to rule out further election promises at a time when Australians are desperate to see inflationary pressures permanently fixed and interest rates come down in Australia like they are in the rest of the world?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
What page? Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Birmingham for that question. It gives me the opportunity to remind those opposite that, in fact, debt is lower under us than it was under you. Remind you that because of course off-budget spending is something that still has to be financed, and I just would make the point that, in fact, as Senator Gallagher said yesterday, we inherited a debt higher than we currently have, and debt is $149 billion lower in 23-24 than what was forecast at the election. And that is saving the nation about $80 billion in interest costs over the decade. So we were asked a question about off-budget spending. I assume the issue is debt, but actually we are, as a result of the budget position that we have established, in fact ensuring that Australians are paying less in interest costs over the decade than it would have been the case under him. But what is also interesting, if I'm asked about off-budget spending, is that we also see that there is some suggestion that those opposite are looking at financing their risky, costly nuclear plan, nuclear announcement off-budget. Off-budget, but we're not quite sure. I mean, let's remember this is $600 billion worth of spending on the most expensive power that you can imagine, which will only deliver less than 4% of the grid and will add $1,000 a year to your energy bills and take up to 20 years before it even starts delivering. And now they're saying, oh, actually, we do want to fund it off-budget. Well, we think we do, thereby adding to debt. So, Senator Birmingham, if you're so concerned about the fiscal circumstances, I invite you to tell the gallery how you are funding your risky, expensive, slow
Thank
nuclear
you, Minister Wong.
scheme.
Senator Birmingham, first supplementary.
President, it's so kind of Minister Wong to wish to turn it into opposition question time and talk about opposition policies. But the Treasurer yesterday stated that despite good progress we are making in the national numbers, we know that doesn't automatically translate into how people feel. Given independent analysis shows real household incomes are unlikely to recover to even half of what they were before this crisis, can Australians ever expect to experience good progress in their household incomes and personal finances that the Treasurer is boasting of?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
Well, I'm very happy to take the question, but I'm not sure how that relates to the primary, which was about off-budget spending. I guess they wanted to get out of the nuclear off-budget story, run away from the story, the headline that says you're going to finance your risky, expensive, very slow nuclear scheme off-budget. But I want to make this point about cost of living and the Treasurer's response, particularly to the inflation figures yesterday. We know Australians are doing it tough. We know that there is a lot more work to do, which is why we are working to keep wages up, why we are working to provide tax cuts for all Australians, why we are working to deliver cheaper medicines and cheaper childcare. And all of these things are priorities for the government. And it is a good thing that we see that monthly inflation is about a third of what we inherited at the election and around a quarter of its peak. That is a good thing. And I would hope Senator Birmingham would say that is a good thing for Australians and their families.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Second supplementary.
Thanks, President. Well, as we leave 2024, Australians are now grappling with the longest household recession in Australia on record, a fact that the government doesn't want to own up to, living standards that are unlikely to recover to where they were prior to the inflation crisis, until at least 2026 or later, and all while the government continues to make more spending promises. Minister, Australians are poorer under this Labor government. When will the government take responsibility and fix the crisis that has driven Australian household incomes down in our country?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, what I'd say to Senator Birmingham is that this is a government that is working to bring down inflation. This is a government that is working to provide cheaper medicines. This is a government working to provide cheaper childcare. And most importantly, unlike those opposite, this is a government working to lift wages. Working to lift wages. We do not think that the response to our cost of living crunch that Australians are experiencing is lower wages. That is always the Liberal way, a deliberate design feature of the economy, a deliberate design feature of the Australian economy. We want to keep real wages moving. We want to keep wages moving. And what we have seen under this government is wages are moving. And I know that is not something those opposites support, but that is something that matters to wage earners around this country, because with a decent wage, that is the pathway to financial security.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Bilyk.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Gallagher. The Albanese Labor government came to government with a promise to reform and improve aged care in Australia. Since then, we've made important reforms and addressed 94 recommendations of the Royal Commission. Reforms include registered nurses on site 24/7, star ratings and mandatory care minutes. Why is the government so committed to reforming aged care, and how will the government's reforms support older Australians and their families and the workers who care for them?
Thank you, Senator Bilyk. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Bilyk for the question, and can I take this opportunity too to acknowledge Senator Bilyk's outstanding service in this chamber, and we're so pleased and proud to work with her. We know, but I thought I would. We know you're coming back next year. I just thought I would acknowledge that. And the work that you've done in aged care over your service in this chamber, because it's work like yours that has helped shape the policy and priorities going forward. And we did go to the election in 2022 promising to lift the standards of aged care in Australia, and I would acknowledge the work that Minister Butler and Minister Wells have done in implementing our policy commitments. We are committed to continuing to reform aged care in Australia because older Australians deserve high-quality care. It's that simple. And since tabling of the Royal Commission report in 2021, 136 recommendations have been addressed. 94 have been addressed. Of those 136, 94 have been addressed by the Albanese government. There is now a registered nurse on site in aged care 99% of the time across Australia. This is an incredible achievement and improves the quality of care for older Australians who live in residential aged care. Under the Albanese government's reforms, older Australians are receiving an additional 3.9 million minutes of care every day. And we know that was one of the critical findings in the Royal Commission, was that older Australians in residential aged care both wanted additional support time, and that would improve the quality of care for them across the centre. So that has been delivered. The aged care bill passed by this chamber last week is a landmark reform addressing 58 recommendations of the Royal Commission. So we've done a lot, but there is more to do, President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bilyk, first supplementary.
Thank you. A key part of the new Aged Care Act is the new Support at Home program. How will Support at Home help older Australians remain independent in their home and their community?
Thank you, Senator Bilyk. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and thanks, Senator Bilyk, for the question. This is one of those areas where we know that older Australians, given the choice, would like to age and continue to age at home with the support and care that they need within the communities that they have lived in and that they love. Our $4.3 billion investment in Support at Home will help around 1.4 million Australians remain independent in their home and in their community for longer. Support at Home will cut wait times to receive in-home aged care services. It will deliver more tailored support with 8 levels of ongoing care instead of 4, and it will ensure faster access to assistive technology like walkers and wheelchairs, and increase the maximum level of support available from $61,000 to $78,000. It's not an understatement to say that these reforms will change lives, including being able to provide palliative care support to ensure older Australians can spend their final weeks at home. And we are very proud of this reform.
Senator Bilyk, second supplementary.
Thank you for those answers, Minister. Aged care workers across the country ensure that the lives of older Australians in care are safe, healthy and fulfilling. Why did the Albanese Labor government decide to increase the wages of aged care workers, and what impact will this have on their lives?
Thank you, Senator Bilyk. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, Senator Bilyk. Thank you, President. I again acknowledge the work of Senator Bilyk in advocating for increased wages for the lowest paid workers in this country. In 2023, we invested $11.3 billion to deliver a historic increase to the award wage for 250,000 workers. Now, this had been a campaign that had been building from those workers themselves through their union and into this parliament. And we know the change that this has brought about. Not only are those workers getting better wages, fairer wages and having their work respected, we're now seeing that there's an increase in retaining workers and attracting workers to that sector, and I have no doubt we'll see similar change when early childhood educators get their wage increase on the 1st of December. Registered nurses are now taking home an additional $196 a week, or more than $10,000 a year, and personal care workers are now taking home an additional $141
Thank you, Minister.
a week.
The time for answering has expired. Senator McKenzie.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Australians are in a cost of living crisis where they're noticing that their money simply is not going as far as it once did due to the record high interest rates, sticky homegrown inflation, declining real household incomes and rising bills. Can the Minister confirm that under the Albanese Labor government, the Employee Cost of Living Index, as reported in the ABS, has shown an increase of 18.9% in the cost of living expenses households are facing?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. And as I said in response to her leader, I'd say to Senator McKenzie, Australians are doing it tough. We understand that, which is why working to lift wages, to bring down costs, to strengthen Medicare, increase bulk billing, build more homes, deliver cheaper medicine, cheaper childcare. These are all things that are priorities. And what I would say to the senator is I'd make this point, that we've seen wages growing for a number of consecutive quarters, and growth in I think the September quarter was the strongest in 4 years. And that is in a very important outcome for working people. It is a very important outcome for Australians trying to deal with cost of living, and it is an outcome that we have been working towards. We know that on this side we are supporters of increased or higher wages for aged care workers, for childcare workers, for workers on the minimum wage, and we understand that lifting wages is central to Australians who are struggling with the cost of living, just as we understood that making sure you can keep more of what you earn is central to meeting cost of living pressures, which is why it is this government that brought forward a revision to the tax cuts to ensure, instead of tax cuts which were unfairly skewed to those on very high incomes, we delivered a tax cut to every Australian taxpayer. Every Australian taxpayer. And Senator McKenzie, what I would say to you is I would remind you that you were so opposed to that for a period when when there was the rush of blood. You wanted to go to an election on it. Do you remember that? They were going to go to an election because they actually didn't want Australians to have a tax cut. So that does say something about the philosophical difference between our parties. We want higher wages and we want lower taxes for working people. You want lower wages and you want people to work more for less.
Senator McKenzie, first supplementary.
I'll take that as you can't or refuse to confirm the ABS employee cost of living increases. Can the minister please confirm for the Senate that the figures released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics that disposable income has collapsed to 8.7% under your government is the largest fall since records began. A simple confirmation, Minister.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Wong.
Well, this is fundamentally a question about inflation, Senator. You're right. Inflation is higher than we would like it to be, but I would make the point it is around a third of what we inherited at the election. I'll take the interjection from Senator McKenzie again. I don't know if I may say, Senator, not your finest interjection. Whose fault is that? That's what she said. Whose fault is that? So when we inherited in monthly inflation nearly 3 times what it is now, whose fault was that? I mean, the reality is inflation is about a third of what the Labor government inherited at the election and around a quarter of its peak. Let's remember that. Now, this is encouraging, and I know you don't celebrate it, but we actually think it's a good thing for working people, for Australians, that inflation is lower. But we know there is more to do, Senator, and unlike you, we are for higher wages, lower taxes for working people. That is not the position of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Minister Wong. The time for answering has expired. Senator McKenzie, second supplementary.
Minister, since the Albanese Labor government was elected, interest rates have increased 12 times. Mortgage interest repayments have tripled, resulting in an average family mortgage being $35,000 more under this government. The US, UK, Canada, Eurozone and New Zealand have all seen cuts. In fact, the government-appointed RBA governor has stated there isn't an interest rate cut in sight. Why are Australians uniquely worse off under Labor than anywhere else in the world?
The time for asking has expired. Minister Wong.
Well, I again say, Senator, 2 things. Monthly inflation is around a third of what we inherited and a quarter of its peak. Those opposite who say inflation is too high, and we would agree. We want inflation to sustainably be within the band. We want inflation to come down from where it was, and so we are. It is a good thing that we see the last ABS figures with the reduction in inflation. It is also a good thing that real wages have grown, as I said, for 4 consecutive quarters. 4 consecutive quarters. If annual wage growth had continued under us as under you, the average Australian worker would have been over $5,500 worse off. I mean, that's what would have happened. Because you know what they are? They're the party that says we want you to work more for less. That's the Liberal Party way of dealing with inflation and dealing with economic challenges. They say to workers, work more
Thank you,
for
Minister.
less.
The time for answering has expired. Senator, order. Order. Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, President. My question is to Minister Wong, representing the Prime Minister. Minister, the long-awaited National Anti-Racism Framework was released this week, and it makes no bones about the roots, extent and depth of systemic, structural and institutional racism and white privilege in this country. The report notes that it is beyond clear that racism has been entrenched in systems, structures and institutions of Australia since colonisation. It is pervasive and causes real harm to people every single day, including, I can add, in this very chamber. The Commission calls on the Australian Government to lead a national response to eliminating racism that begins with truth-telling for First Nations and embeds their rights to self-determination. Minister, will you commit to fully funding and implementing the National Anti-Racism Framework that begins with truth-telling for First Nations peoples?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Wong.
Thank you. And I've spoken before in this place and in my public life over many years about the effect of racism and the experience of racism, as I did also, Senator, in relation to your the targeting of you by Senator Hanson. So I think my comments about the existence of and the damage that racism causes are well established. In relation to the Human Rights Commission's National Anti-Racism Report, I would like to thank the Race Discrimination Commissioner for his work. This is important work, and we have a long way to go when it comes to eliminating racism in all sectors of Australian society. All of us have a role to play in ensuring that there is no racism in this country. No one should be targeted because of who they are or what they believe, and it is a fundamental principle of our democracy that people should live without that people should feel and be safe, regardless of who they are or which faith they adhere to. Now, in terms of the recommendations, that report has been provided to government. I understand. I think to the Attorney-General is the responsible minister. I'm looking at Minister Watt, who's looking at it. Yes, I think that's right. The government will carefully consider the 63 recommendations that related to work being progressed across government.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Faruqi, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, the only way to unwind entrenched racism is to accept that approaches to date have been ad hoc, disjointed and ineffective, because governments have avoided the truth about racism and the whitewashed structures that persist at every level. Minister, one of the overarching recommendations is for the government to establish a national anti-racism task force to oversee and advise on the implementation of the National Anti-Racism Framework. Given the urgency of the work, will you commit to the task force today?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, as I said, Senator Faruqi, I think the report was handed to government this week, and we will work through those recommendations as I indicated.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Faruqi, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, this workplace is one where the existence of racism is denied, while those calling it out are dismissed, vilified, and even punished. The framework acknowledges that a person calling out racism often endures more negative repercussions than the perpetrator, and highlights the need of understanding how systems, structures, and institutions are racist and to build racial literacy. Minister, will you mandate anti-racism training for senators and MPs so racial literacy can be built in here?
Thank you, Minister Wong. It isn't I'm advised by the clerk, it isn't the government's responsibility to mandate the training, but I will invite the minister to respond to your question in her own way.
Thank you, President. And I think it is the case that there are often we do see or we do ourselves experience criticism for calling things out, and it is the case that people should be able to both be and feel safe in this workplace as in all others. You have a number of propositions in the earlier part of your question which I don't agree with, but I do agree with the need for all of us to recognise what we can do to make our society more inclusive, to make this workplace more respectful, and part of that is to ensure that we are respectful in how we treat each other.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. The educational outcomes of First Nations students are still significantly lower than that of their peers. I understand that for many First Nations students from remote areas, boarding schools are the only option to engage in education. What steps has the Albanese Labor government taken to support First Nations students in Central Australia?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Stewart for her question and her interest in Central Australia. The Albanese government's $18 million investment in boarding school infrastructure in Central Australia is a game-changer for First Nations students from remote communities. For many of these children, boarding school is not just an option, it's their only opportunity, President. This initiative builds on a proud legacy of ensuring education for remote Indigenous students, one that began when Gough Whitlam established the boarding colleges at Urara College, giving kids the chance to succeed in a supportive environment. And I speak from experience as well, President. As a child, I made the journey over 1,000 kilometres, 1,000 kilometres I should say, not 100,000, from Borroloola to Alice Springs to boarding school there as well. It's why I'm so incredibly proud to announce on my recent trip to Alice Springs funding to continue Labor's legacy of education for our remote kids. The funding offer included $10 million to upgrade the boarding facilities at Urara College, alongside $1.7 million for St Philip's College and $6.3 million for Yiperinya School.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Minister, for that response. How will this funding support schools in Central Australia to improve their facilities, and what difference will this make for First Nations students?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. The $18 million in funding is directly supporting schools like Urara College and St Philip's College to create better environments for learning and for growth. At Urara, the $10 million investment will upgrade and expand boarding facilities, ensuring students have access to comfortable and modern living spaces that support their educational journey. And it was wonderful to be with the Urara College students on that day, President, especially the senior students who talked about what they would like to see happen. St Philip's College will use its $1.7 million allocation to improve its facilities and provide a better boarding experience for First Nations students. And these upgrades will make a significant difference in ensuring students feel supported, safe and motivated to engage in their education. The Ypirangi School Board met shortly after the funding offer was made and unanimously voted to withdraw their application.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, second supplementary.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Minister, for that response. Following the withdrawal of Ypirangi School's funding application, what steps are being taken to reallocate the unused funding to benefit students and young people in Central Australia?
Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. The National Indigenous Australians Agency is currently exploring options to allocate this $6.3 million of the $18 million of funding to other important projects in Central Australia. The need in Central Australia is significant, and our government is committed to ensuring this opportunity is not wasted. My agency will shortly provide me with advice about how we can reallocate the remaining $6.3 million to benefit the people of Central Australia by expanding educational opportunities and increasing residential facilities for remote students. And I do welcome input from those members opposite, and in particular the Shadow Indigenous Affairs Minister, in regards to that as well.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Van.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator McAllister. Minister, I note the announcement this week of an expert panel looking at reviewing the national energy market. The terms of reference weren't very specific. Are you able to share with the chamber exactly what the panel has been tasked to review and make recommendations on?
Minister McAllister.
Thank you very much, Senator, for the question. I don't have the terms of reference with me, and so I'm not able to share that with you, but I can make this broad observation, which is that the energy system, as you entirely understand, is undergoing a very significant transition. That transition is underway. Increasingly, a very significant amount of the capacity in the grid is renewable, and we are seeing greater and greater strain placed on the coal-fired power stations, which once formed the core of the electricity system, but are increasingly coming to the end of their life. The way that the rules of the national electricity market and all of the infrastructure around that market are organised need to be tailored to make sure that the investment conditions are suitable and will continue to encourage investment in the technologies that we know are the most affordable technologies for new generation. And of course that is firmed renewables. We've had this conversation many times in this chamber, but it remains the case, despite the assertions of those opposite, that the cheapest form of new generation is firmed for renewables. It is considerably cheaper by the widest margin than nuclear energy. And I do note that the Coalition has repeatedly made promises to reveal their costings. I think it was in September that Mr Littleproud told us that all the costings were in fact practically done for all purposes, and this would all be out in the public domain by November. Well, clock's ticking. We have a handful of days in November. Where are these costings? These costings that Mr Littleproud said were in fact ready back in September. It might have even been August. This morning Mr Taylor's asked about this, and Mr Taylor says, "Oh, I never said you'd have them by Christmas. I never said you'd have them by Christmas. You might get them before the election," honestly.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Van, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. As you would also be aware, and I bring to the Chamber's attention, that earlier this year the Energy Climate Change Ministerial Council released a review of the ISP. This review recognised quite a few gaps, and for those that are following along, it was apparent that these gaps not only need to be addressed but should have been addressed before now. Will the panel be making recommendations on those gaps?
Thank you, Senator Van. Minister McAllister.
Thank you very much, President. And as I indicated in my response to your primary question, I don't have the terms of reference for the panel here with me. But I will say this, there is a power of work underway to deal with the many legacy issues that arise from a decade of neglect and dysfunction under the previous government. Some of that, and I know this will be of interest to you, Senator Van, is the recently released information from the Australian Energy Market Commission about the approach to smart meter rollouts. I think you have asked me on a number of occasions about how that is going to be handled, and the new rule in particular includes some very important customer safeguards, including protecting customers from potential cost risks by prohibiting any upfront costs ahead of a smart meter installation, and particularly importantly, introducing new explicit informed consent and notification requirements.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Van, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. As you are no doubt aware, the Senate is currently conducting an inquiry into energy planning and regulation. Its report is due to be tabled before Christmas. Will the government refer its findings and recommendations to the panel to be formally considered?
Thank you, Senator Van. Minister McAllister.
Thank you very much. I will leave a decision about that matter to Minister Bowen. I can't preempt his decision or indeed the findings of the committee that you are involved in, Senator. But I can say to you that, of course, we want the panel to draw on the widest possible range of information in contemplating the issues that we've asked them to think about. And I think at the core of this is a need to ensure that we understand how the grid and the market will operate together to secure the interests of energy users and consumers as we continue through this transition. We've got a lot of policy settings in place to 2030, but the transition will continue beyond that. And we understand that reforms and policy reform is required to make sure that the investment that is required continues to flow into that sector.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash.
Thank you. And my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Mr Albanese has totally humiliated his Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, and his second preference allies in the Australian Greens by scuttling a deal on his so-called nature-positive laws, which in reality are laws all about killing mining investment and mining jobs. Isn't it true, however, that Mr Albanese is planning to reintroduce these laws or similar laws after the next election and has not abandoned these disastrous laws at all?
Good question. Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, can I say first, in relation to the first part of the question, which, it seems that the Deputy Leader is arguing that there should be more bills added to the guillotine today, whereas before I thought she was, waxing quite outraged by the fact that the bills that.
Order.
Do you want me to give an answer, or do you just want to keep talking? All right, you want to keep talking, fine. You can just keep talking.
Minister Wong, have you finished your contribution? Otherwise, I'll invite the Senator. Order! 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 Senator McGrath. Senator Cash, do you want to? Order!
to respond. First, in relation to passing legislation, as I said, the Deputy Leader was acting quite outraged this morning and now is suggesting that we should be adding a bill to the guillotine. In relation to the national environment laws, I think and I know that the Deputy Leader of the opposition is desperate to run a scare campaign in Western Australia, just so desperate. Obviously, we are very, very conscious of the importance of engagement with the states and territories about this. We are very conscious that delivering improvements to national environment laws will require common sense and cooperation, and that is the approach the government will be taking.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Will the Prime Minister give the Australian people, and in particular the people of Western Australia, an ironclad guarantee that is nature-positive legislation or any similar legislation will not be reintroduced into the parliament?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Wong.
Yes. I would make the point, Senator, that my recollection is, and I might be wrong because there's a lot been happening, but my recollection is this legislation was a response to the review which was commissioned by your now Deputy Leader, Ms Lee. And so, I know that doesn't sit well with your scare campaign, but Professor Graham Samuel made some very important observations and recommendations about the problem with Australia's environmental laws, including the fact that the laws were not working for business nor for the environment. But having said that, what you will continue to see from this government, and certainly from the Prime Minister, is a recognition that delivering improvements to legal frameworks around the country requires cooperation and common sense. That is the approach he has taken on all policy areas, and that is the approach that will be taken on this one.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash, second supplementary.
Thank you. And every Western Australian knows that mining is the backbone of our state's economy. Why is the Prime Minister creating uncertainty and confusion in the mining sector by his refusal to completely abandon laws which will destroy investment and jobs in this sector?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Wong.
Well, can I just remind the Deputy Leader that, in part, the reforms ensure faster, clearer decision-making for business, something that business has been calling for since 2020, which was when the former Minister for the Environment and the now Deputy Leader of the Opposition commissioned Professor Samuel to review the Act. So the problem with your scare campaign, Senator Cash, no, it is not. It is another Senator Cash scare campaign, as she always wants them, whether it's the dark ages. Do you remember how industrial law reform would take us back to the dark ages? This is a shadow minister who always goes too far, who always over-exaggerates, who always goes too far because, always says that things will close down Australia. We've heard it all before, and it's simply untrue, Senator Cash.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, the New South Wales Government has just withdrawn and refunded more than 23,000 COVID fines for offences like walking outside in the sun. This is in addition to 36,000 fines withdrawn in 2022. People who chose to fight these had police charges hanging over their head for years when the fines themselves were illegal or long. Your voluntary COVID review didn't say one word about these fines because it was specifically instructed by your government to turn a blind eye to everything state governments did. Why is the Prime Minister so scared of calling a royal commission with the power to take evidence on oath, subpoena documents and look at all aspects of state and federal government's response to COVID? Why won't you commit to calling a royal commission now?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for the question. And while I do not agree with the view you take of these issues, you are, I will say, very consistent in the views that you put on these issues. And I would make a few points. The first is obviously the offences or the fines that you refer to are state jurisdiction, and I can't comment on how the states are approaching the enforcement or non-enforcement of those penalties. Obviously, that's a matter for the relevant state authorities. I appreciate that you have been consistent in calling for a broader inquiry. I did take the time, and I'm sure you did too, to look at not every page, but a fair bit of the inquiry that did come down. I thought it was a very thorough, very considered piece of work, which focused much less on pointing the finger and allocating blame than working out how Australia as a country, and particularly how the Commonwealth Government can learn from the experience of the pandemic. And that is the approach that the government is taking to this. I appreciate you had a different view about the federal government's response. There were certainly mistakes made. There were certainly things we could do better. We were very critical, for example, of the failure to assist stranded Australians after the borders were closed and so forth. But the focus of the review or the report was very much what did we learn from something that we have not experienced in our lifetimes before, and how, in an age of pandemics, can we ensure that we are better prepared for the next pandemic.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, President. Prime Minister Albanese was elected promising to govern with transparency. Within months of being elected, the government called a Royal Commission into Robodebt. It's now 30 months after you were elected to government, and there is still no Royal Commission into COVID. Will you govern with transparency and call a COVID Royal Commission that goes way beyond what your inquiry did, or does your government's transparency promise only apply when it's politically convenient to you?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Wong.
Well, Senator, I think really that I'd refer you to the answer to your primary question. I mean, we have taken the view that rather than a process of allocating blame, that the most important thing as a country for us to do was to be upfront and very honest about mistakes that were made or areas where we could have done better, state and federal, but focus on how we better prepare the country, in particular the Commonwealth Government, for the risk of future pandemics. So it is a very thorough report. It is a very thorough assessment of what we did well and what we didn't do well. It makes, I think, very good recommendations, including near-term and medium-term priority areas where we need to strengthen our capacity and our capability. And that is a good thing for us to do. It's an important thing for us to do. Pandemics are likely to be, regrettably, more prevalent, and so we need to be better prepared, and that's what we're focused on.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Thank you. We agree accountability and justice are essential. We're not interested in blame. That's for future prevention. Throughout state and federal government's COVID response, endless things were labelled misinformation that turned out to be true. And the tens of thousands of vaccine-injured and bereaved are owed massive compensation. Those are just the things we found out without a Royal Commission. Why is the government so scared of calling a proper COVID Royal Commission that would answer once and for all whether it was really the government who put out misinformation?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Wong.
Well, Senator, I mean, your last question, I think, really bells the cat, if I may say. This is not about engaging in an argument around vaccines and health information and the views that you and others have about what is correct and what is not. With respect, I know you have your views. They're not shared by the government. I don't think they were shared by the Morrison government, and they're not shared by many people in the public health space. Now, you're entitled to those views, but we are not looking to have a Royal Commission which is about re-prosecuting health policy and health facts. That is the subject of independent advice. What we are interested in is making sure that in a pandemic where we saw so many people around the world die and had such an effect on the global economy and on Australia's economy, we are interested in improving our response to such pandemics.
Has expired. Senator Payman.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Education, Minister Watt. Minister, given that Australia had fee-free university education from 1974 to 1989 and several comparable nations continue to provide free or low-cost tertiary education, why does this government continue to support a pay-to-learn model that burdens young Australians with lifelong debt instead of pursuing a return to fee-free education?
Thank you, Senator Payman. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Payman. Of course, it's the Albanese government that is delivering some of the greatest savings to university students and graduates that we've seen in decades from any government in Australia. It is our policy that students in higher education should make a contribution towards the cost of their education in recognition at the significant benefits that they gain typically from that sort of higher education. But I might borrow from my good friend Senator Farrell in answer to another question that you asked this week, Senator Payman, and point out that the platform that you were elected on as a then Labor Party candidate for the Senate was one that supported the notion that students should make contributions towards their education. But I'm pleased to say that in the time since then, since you decided to no longer be a member of the Labor Party, the Labor Party's platform has actually improved for students and for graduates of higher education, to a point where we have now, in the last couple of weeks, agreed and committed to reduce HELP debts, whether that be university or TAFE graduates' debts, by 20%. So there has actually been an improvement to our platform compared to the one that you stood on as a candidate for the Labor Party at the last federal election. We've also made changes in that time to reduce the indexation for students for the debts, in recognition that inflation has been rising in a very big way and that students' debts should not escalate to the same degree. So I'm very pleased that this government has made decisions to support students better than it had done at the time of the last election or at any other time before, and we'll keep continuing to support students in that way.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Payman, first supplementary.
Minister, the proposed 20% reduction to HECS help is a step forward, but why can it not be delivered now? Why is the government holding it hostage and as a vote-buying exercise for students to have to wait until after the next election, when this is a much-needed cost of living measure that needs to happen now?
Thank you, Senator Payman. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Payman. Well, these are obviously issues that the government considered in framing the policy that we have decided to take to the next election, with every single member of this caucus still continuing to support those policies and continuing to deliver for students rather than simply asking questions about it. The reality is that making changes of this kind do take time. They take legislative changes. They have impacts on the HECS and the HELP scheme more broadly, and it does take time to actually have that delivered. But what I can say is that I know that every single member who remains in the Labor caucus has the opportunity to put these views forward, and it is the collective action of this caucus that has led our Prime Minister, Mr Albanese, to make the commitment for the greatest reduction in HELP debts that we have seen from any government in decades in Australia. Now, we understand that university students and TAFE graduates are doing it tough right now, and that's why we will use the power of government to deliver cheaper courses for those people.
Has expired. Senator Payman, second supplementary.
Minister, the Job Ready Graduates package has been widely criticised for increasing student fees for arts, law and business degrees by up to 113%. Despite these criticisms and its clear negative impact on access to higher education, your government has yet to repeal this policy. Can you explain why the government continues to allow these inequitable fee structures to persist?
Thank you, Senator Payman. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Payman. Well, again, what we're doing is, over time, making university degrees and TAFE qualifications cheaper for hundreds of thousands of Australians. As a result of the work that Minister Jason Clare has undertaken through the Universities Accord, that is also delivering more affordable education and more accessible education.
Oh, you finished. Sorry, Senator Payman.
President, I've been patient with the first two questions. It's been half of the time that the minister's taken, and he has not mentioned Job Ready Graduates package at all.
Senator Payman, the minister's being directly relevant to your question. Minister Watt, please continue.
So, Senator Payman, it's obviously your right as an independent senator to now ask questions as an independent senator about this, but every member of this Labor caucus uses their position as a member of the government to advocate for the benefit of university graduates and for TAFE graduates as well.
Order.
And it's as a result of the advocacy of every member of this Labor caucus that our government is now delivering cheaper TAFE qualifications, cheaper university degrees and reductions in the debts that those students own. That is a much more effective way than of delivering change for university students than any question asked here in question.
Senator Ruston.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, can you confirm Labor has added over $9.4 billion of off-budget spending over the next 4 years, totalling off-budget spending of $87.1 billion, up from Treasury's forecast of $78 billion? And if so, how does this spending reflect the Albanese government commitment to budget repair?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister Wong.
Well, thank you, President. Well, you know, to have that question on a day, or is it the day after? I'm sorry, the days are merging together, where we see the Financial Review headline that you are going to add more money to off-budget spending by putting the multi-billion-dollar expensive, slow and risky nuclear scheme but spent off budget is really quite extraordinary, Senator Ruston. So your question to me is, we don't like off-budget spending, but shh, don't mention $600 billion. Don't mention $600 billion for an expensive, slow-to-build, risky nuclear scheme, Senator Ruston. So, Senator Ruston, I could answer your question by pointing out that debt was $149 billion lower in 23-24 than was forecast at the election, and that has saved Australians around $80 billion in interest costs. I could point that out to you, but I'm also saying to you, Senator Ruston, don't come in here and ask a question about off-budget spending when your government, when you are proposing, should you win government, to add $600 billion to the off-budget spend for a nuclear scheme which will deliver 4% of Australia's electricity at the most expensive cost to Australians. Genius. I mean, that's a genius question and a genius scheme.
Senator Ruston, first supplementary.
Is that it? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that was it. Couldn't even muster the full time.
Minister, economist Chris Richardson stated that student debt should not be treated off-budget since it was a loss-making enterprise for government, and that from the viewpoint of the Australian public, something should only go off-budget if it's commercial. Student loans just aren't.
Senator Watt.
How do you justify using off-budget spending as a way to hide your spending splurge from the Australian public?
Order. Order across the chamber. Minister Wong.
I'm a little confused by the question about student debt. Certainly student debt features in the debt figures. I wasn't aware, and I might be wrong, that there had been a change in the accounting treatment of student debt. But what I would say to you, so I'm not sure that Mr Richardson's question, if you have correctly said that, probably applies to both sides of politics. But what I would say to you, if the test is commerciality, if the test is that should be commercial spending, well, how are you going to make? How do you propose to make sure that your nuclear spend could even be funded off budget? I mean, $600 billion. This is the proposition, colleagues. This is the proposition, colleagues. That an uncommercial venture, and if there ever were a definition of an uncommercial venture, it's Peter Dutton's risky nuclear scheme. An uncommercial venture can't be funded off budget. Well, how are you going to fund it?
Answering has expired. Senator Ruston, second supplementary.
Clearly didn't do economics. Minister, independent analysis indicates an estimated $54.8 billion headline deficit this financial year, some $21.3 billion worse than the underlying deficit of $33.5 billion due to your excessive off-budget spending. Doesn't this prove that your self-congratulatory, back-patting rhetoric is only misleading, but it's also false, and that we leave 2024, the Albanese Labor government has now abandoned any attempt to really rein in the budget?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister Wong.
Well,
order.
I mean, the short answer to that, Senator, is no, and we sort of moved from off budget to the UCB and then back to debt figures in that question. And I note that Senator Hume didn't ask that question. You might ask why,
order.
I think she would have framed it perhaps in a way that was a little more reflective of the budget parameters. But what I would say to you, Senator Ruston, is we saw the debt figures when we came to government. We saw the deficit figures when we came to government. We also saw, the back in black mugs. Do you remember them? And what I'd say to you, Senator, is we saw a couple of surpluses, debt being paid down and less interest being paid by Australians. Now, it is the case that we are in a challenging economic environment. What we will not do is deal with that by cutting wages, by cutting Medicare, and by funding an expensive nuclear gamble off budget.
Has expired. Senator Pratt.
My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, Senator Watt. From the inner suburbs of Brisbane to Devonport in Tasmania and across the country to Victoria Park in WA, Australian workers are doing their bit to ensure Australia continues to be the lucky country. Whether it's educating and caring for the next generation of Australians, building our homes and roads and hospitals, or ensuring food gets from the warehouse to the supermarket shelves in time for Christmas, Aussie workers are showing up for us. Given this, how is the Albanese Labor government helping Australian workers earn more and keep more of what they earn? Are there any examples of the government's policies delivering a fair go for Australian workers?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you very much, Senator Pratt. And Senator Pratt, as all of us knows, that Australians are doing it tough right now, particularly as they face the additional costs of Christmas shopping. And that's why the Albanese government has been working hard to deliver pay rises for millions of workers, including the 15% wage increase for early childhood educators and teachers we legislated this week.
Order.
Now, Christmas is a time of giving, and in that spirit of generosity I have penned this ode to the workers of Australia. 'Twas the sitting before Christmas, and all through the Senate every creature was stirring, especially Senator Rennick.
Order.
At work, Australians are in shops, schools and sheds, while thoughts of Christmas leave dance in their heads.
Senator
All year
McGrath.
Labor's worked hard to deliver a pay rise. For workers, the Libs have been no's, but Labor's been ayes. Now an outrage, Senator Cash, and a grinchy Mr Dutton have settled their IR plans, which would leave workers with nothing. Cutting pay, cutting casuals, their cuts many pages, but all with one aim, cutting Aussie workers' wages. Then out from the House there arose such a clatter. I sprang from my seat to see what's the matter, when what to my shocked eyes did suddenly appear but a shadowy cabinet sucking up to billionaires near and dear. Now Gina, now Tina, oh what a lark, on Clive, on Ray, on Sky After Dark. Down the chimney Peter Dutton came on foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with coal and black soot.
Minister Watt. Minister Watt, please resume your seat. Senator McGrath. Order. 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 Gosh, we were doing so well this question time, Senator McGrath.
A point of order. This is cringe.
That isn't a point of order, Senator McGrath. Senator Watt, please continue.
Thank you, President. Good to see the outrage from Senator Cash. A bundle of nuclear rods Mr Dutton had flung on his back straight from Chernobyl, just opening his pack, dreaming of post-election when he gets to work, raiding every worker's pockets. Then he turned with a jerk. He considered a sleigh, but said to his friends, "Do not fret," and away they all flew on their billionaires' jets. With his billionaire mates, he flew out of sight, saying, "Happy Grinchmas to all."
Thank you, Minister Watt. Order. 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 Senator Pratt.
However true, your poetry is as bad as Gina Rinehart, Senator Watt. The festive season, nevertheless, would not be the same without the hard-working people in our supermarkets, retail shops, restaurants and cafes, and thank you for acknowledging that. Mr Dutton believes that paying Australian workers fairly would, and I quote, undoubtedly damage the Australian economy. So how is the Albanese Labor government's reforms helping Australians get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and why is it so important that the value of Australian workers is reflected in this pay?
Minister Watt, before I get you to answer, if there are any more poetic references to people in the other place, you do need to use their correct title. And if there is a normal response to the question, that applies equally. Thank you, Minister
Thank you,
Watt.
President. Well, unfortunately, the opposition, we know they don't like being told in prose that they're about cutting wages. It seems they don't like it in poetry either. I would sing, except I'm not allowed to. Anyway, you don't like being told that you're going to cut workers' wages if you get half a chance, just like you've always done when you've been in government. Now, of course, it's not just poetry that hard-working Australians get from this government. They also get help to achieve wage increases and tax cuts. And seriously, they do get help, Senator Cash. I know that's a foreign notion to you, the idea that a government would help workers with pay rises, and we know that that's what you think because you've voted against every single one of them. But you know what workers like Sunita, an early educator from Victoria Park in Western Australia, have to say about pay rises? What she says is the news of the pay rise for early educators is amazing. She's had calls from co-workers who'd left early education who are now wanting to come back. Under Labor, workers will earn more and keep more of what they earn. Under you lot, they will work longer for less.
The time has expired. Senator Pratt, second supplementary.
Mr Dutton, the Liberals and Nationals have proudly stated those on the coalition side of the chamber will always stand with employers of Australia. So, Minister, why is it so important to stand with Australian workers and families by putting more money in their pockets this Christmas? And what are the key barriers to achieving this?
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President. Thanks, Senator Cash. Well, it is important that we have a Labor government working hard to deliver the wage rises that Australian workers need. And what we also know is that under Mr Dutton, the coalition has tried to block every single cost of living measure this year. And what's worse, they've been proud of it. Remember Senator Hume, who said that wage rises for workers would be the worst thing. Remember Senator Cash, who said that wage rises would close down Australia. Remember Senator Cash, who said paid domestic and family violence leave would disincentivise employers from hiring women and said our workplace reforms would close down Australia. Remember again Senator Hume, who said more rights for workers was unreasonable and that the Liberals would consider scrapping same job, same pay. We know, as this year wraps up, that many Australians continue to do it very tough, and that is exactly why we need a government that will do everything possible to put more money in people's pockets with higher wages and cost of living relief. And what they do not need is a Liberal opposition who wants to cut, cut, cut.
The time for answering has expired. Minister.
I'm sorry. I was distracted by Senator Cash, who actually was being quite nice to me, and so I was just so shocked. Shame. OK. With that, President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice.